right. You guys are good? Do you want me to do something different? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming today. I know it's we're in a big space with a small group, but I'm excited to have this conversation and be able to share it with people really all over the world. The Godly Play Facebook page was very interested in this topic, so we're going to get started. Of course, if you are already a Godly player, you know that it's hard to remember sometimes, but that you have all the time you need. And so the first thing I want to do is encourage you, as you think about scheduling, not to get anxious about what the children are getting, because you have all the time that you need, and they will get all the story that they need, and they will get what they need. So that's the first place to start. Let's be relaxed. So my suggestion for scheduling for a Godly Play year is really to schedule for 3 years. And the reason that I would suggest that is as you're moving through Godly Play with the children in your parish, you really want to cover in 3-year cycles the spiral curriculum. And we're going to talk more about that, but I just want to encourage you to think about how can you take the time to invest it's a pretty serious project to put together a 3-year schedule, but it really is worth it. And I think it's sort of funny that I'm the person presenting this workshop because Whitney knows, actually this whole table might know, I am not a particularly organized or schedule-oriented person. So you might have gotten an email from the Godly Play Foundation yesterday that said, look, we're gonna have these stickers. Well, that's because yesterday morning I decided we need those stickers. And so then we did it. And I didn't even talk to anybody about it. And I like to do things on the fly. So a 3-year schedule is not exactly my wheelhouse. However, it really has been very helpful in my practice of Godly Play to think holistically about the children that are in our programs. I've worked in several different churches and done Godly Play in a school setting as well. What does it look like for them over those 3 years? So I'm not actually going to give you a schedule yet. We're mostly going to talk about some things that I think are important as you're thinking about getting ready to make your schedule. The first thing you really want to do is figure out what do you have. And that seems kind of obvious, but a lot of churches have Godly Play rooms with stories that somebody might not even know what they are. Or maybe it's not a Godly Play story. Or maybe they have a full set of materials that is age inappropriate. So the very first thing to do is to really get a good inventory of what you have. And not just an inventory, but are these things really ready to go? Is at the first day, is every story ready to be told? And that's hard. It's a big job. It is a job that you can invite people into, and it's a way for people to learn about Godly Play, the philosophy of Godly Play, the importance of the environment in Godly Play, people who are not necessarily called to be in the circle with children. It's a really nice teaching time if you can invite some people into helping you do that inventory. So I would highly recommend that. And a lot of the things that I'm going to say today kind of come back to this point that I learned over time working in ministry, which is that ministry is not efficient. So taking the time to do this inventory, maybe with some people who could benefit from learning about what you're doing, that's an investment in your program. It might not be efficient, but it's a good thing to think about doing. The other thing to think about as you're taking that inventory is what's going on in your classroom that is setting the children up for success to be able to engage with silence. And so is your classroom very busy? Are there some things that you want to think about taking down? Maybe that's not possible because you share space with a preschool. I don't know. But what can you do as you're inventorying your materials to also take inventory of how am I allowing silence to emerge in this space? How's the space encouraging that? So quickly, just a review, and I'm not going to go through all this, but there are the 4 genres of story, and you want to know what you have and which genre they fall into, and that's going to help you with your planning. So that's just there for you to look at later if you want to. The next thing I want us to think about is who are the children that you are really serving? So not who's the ideal child, not what do we wish we had, but who are these children? And what do they need? And what does their life look like? You know, does half of your Sunday school class play Sunday morning baseball? And what does that mean? And how do you incorporate that into your schedule? So I don't have an answer for that, but I do want to encourage you to be thinking about those questions. Do you have children who sing in the choir, and so they only come to Godly Play once a month? What does that mean for them? How are you going to think about those children while you're scheduling? All right. Oh, my PowerPoint just got a little messed up. That's okay. So the next thing I want to go back to is this spiral curriculum. Many churches only use Godly Play for their 3 to 6-year-olds, which I want to pause and say, please include your 3-year-olds. They can do it. It is so wonderful. It's hard for people sometimes, but that 3 to 6 class is just such a great special age. So even if you're only using Godly Play for 3 to 6-year-olds, I think that it's helpful for those children for you to think in 3-year chunks. With the 3 to 6-year-olds, you're sticking with the core stories. So you can see that everything you do in that primary classroom, that 3 to 6 classroom, is going to come from the core stories, those stories that are just essential. But often, we don't have enough time to do every core story in a year. And so putting together a 3-year cycle for those children as well is important so that you can see, what has this class as a group been exposed to. Now, one of the things that people kind of think about sometimes is we often have children who are only coming once a month, twice a month, whatever. And even if that's the case, going through that cycle of stories with the class then at least puts that story in the midst of the community of children. So I would caution you against thinking, well, but they're not going to come, and so I don't want to plan this 3 years out. I'll just do exactly the same thing every time. So that's just a side note about that. As you move up into the 6 to 9-year-old group, and again, even if you're not using Godly Play with this age group, I think it's a helpful exercise if you have the time or the interest to just think about, well, if we did do Godly Play, how would we want to structure it for that age group? And since we're not, what does the fact that they had this first cycle, the 3 to 6 cycle, how is that informing the next 3 years of their experience in our program? So in a perfect world, in my mind, you would be doing Godly Play with the 6 to 9-year-olds. But if you're not, how can you think about scheduling in a chunk for that group as well so that you're keeping track of what they've been doing and how that's informing their spiritual journey? In the 6 to 9-year-old classroom, you're going to still really want to stay grounded in those core stories. So it can feel really exciting and kind of overwhelming if you have all the resources in the world and you buy every enrichment and extension story and your bottom shelves are full and you just want to dive in and you want to go through them all right in a row. But the children really need to return to those core stories as you are working through the bottom shelf sacred stories. So I'm talking about, for instance, the kind of example that I gave. If you want to introduce in this year the falling apart story, you're going to go ahead and tell the original creation story that they're familiar with first. And then the next week you can introduce the falling apart. And then you might want to tell the great family and spend 3 Sundays after that looking at some of those more in-depth stories of the individuals who are part of the great family. But then you're going to go back to the exile and return, for instance, and the prophets, and then you might do a few prophets, so that you're really always connecting them back to some of those core stories that they were already familiar with. And then, as you start to plan your 3-year cycle, you're going to look, my suggestion, I have a whole table of experts over here who's going to correct me later, but here too. But what I like to do is say, I have kind of 3 chunks of stories that go together. And so if a child is in the classroom from 6 to 9, so for 3 years, they're going to hear every extension story, but maybe only once, because they're always circling back to those core stories. So here you can see 2 that I included, the mystery of Christmas and the parable of parables. Those are enrichment stories, which this all gets a little complicated. I'm kind of anxious about treading into it because I don't want to get it wrong, but this is what I think. And then they'll come back and say if I'm wrong. So the extension stories are really taking those core stories and giving you more. They're extending it, right? So we've done the great family, and now we really want to know about Sarah. What do we know about Sarah? The enrichment stories are taking a core story or stories and giving you similar information in a different way, exposing the children to that in a new way, so that you're circling, again, back around to that core of what we want to focus on with children. So having all of that in mind before you sit down to plan, I think is very helpful and important, because it is so tempting to just want to do something new. You know, like we think we want to do something new, and what the children need is a structured approach to introducing more and more that we invite them into. So be focusing on that spiral curriculum. The next thing, and this whole presentation is really about being intentional when you schedule, but know why you're doing Godly Play. So I had a family when we first started using Godly Play at the cathedral maybe 12 years ago. And the mom came to me and said, we can't do this. We're leaving. We're going to a new church because you only have so long to shove the word of God down their throats. She literally said that. And, you know, that people think that. And I said, I think it sounds like a good idea to go to another church. We're not going to do that. But that's a concern that people have, right? That are we covering enough ground? What are the children, what's the takeaway? What's the content? And so being really clear before you start making a schedule that that's not your purpose. You know, your purpose is not to shove the word of God down their throat, of course, and it's also not to kind of zoom through lots and lots of different things without going deeply into anything. Your real goal in Godly Play is to go through that spiral curriculum so that children can use the Christian language system to make meaning in their lives. And that's like really big, exciting work. But it's easy to move away from that as your goal when you have other people kind of in your head talking about, well, we want to do this and we want to think about that. And so really always coming back to what is the actual goal of Godly Play, and then how is my schedule informing that goal? I'm the director of a preschool in my real life, and we recently moved away from using Letter of the Week. So that's a long-standing preschool tradition. And basically, children are uninterested, 3-year-olds in particular, and they don't connect with a letter because it doesn't mean anything to them. And we spent the entire year, year after year, going through Letter of the Week, having a penguin-shaped sandwich for snack on Pee Week, and all of this stuff that was in service of the adults, right? Like, it made the parents feel comfortable. It gave the teachers a way to feel like they were making progress. it was cute. It is cute. I mean, it's very cute. They all wore their pajamas on P Day. I mean, like lots of great stuff about Letter of the Week. But if its purpose was to teach the letters, it did not accomplish that. And so we have moved now to doing a much more integrated introduction of letters that's focusing, this is more than you want to know about this, but anyway, my point is that zooming through stories to get the content out not only doesn't serve children's spiritual growth, it doesn't even really work. So don't do it. Be intentional. Know what the goal of your Godly Play program is. Pay attention to the fact that the way that you schedule things is going to communicate something to the people who are participating in that schedule. You know, do you only have Godly Play once a month? Well, maybe that's fine. Maybe that reflects the values of your parish. But if it doesn't, then why is that what's happening, right? So just what does it mean when you're presenting people with a schedule, teachers or parents or the rest of the church? What are you telling them by the way that you schedule when you have Godly Play as well as what's happening in the classroom? Another thing to think about is just how much time is getting shifted to special events. In some churches, this is a big deal. In other churches, it's not a big deal. It's not bad. I mean, having special events at church is a great thing for children. Intergenerational stuff is a great thing for children. But how often is that happening? Why? And what's the purpose of that event? So just asking those questions. It doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you know why you're doing it, right? The other thing about that is, quickly, do you have a plan for a shortened class period? So if you have a special event, but it's only half the time that you would normally occupy the children, what's happening in the second half? And how is what you're choosing to do with that shortened time frame either reinforcing what you want to have happen in your Godly Play classroom or undermining what you want to have happen in your Godly Play classroom? So to be more specific about that, if you're doing something amazing, like we have something that's the children go through and shop at a little market that's set up, and so everybody brings some money and then they put it for the food bank. So they have that physical action. It's a great thing for them to do. But if they then come back into the Godly Play classroom for 15 minutes, what's happening? You know, are we better off just gonna go play on the playground today? Because that's a good thing to do too. Or if we are coming back into the classroom, are we having a very intentional feast and talking about what we just did? Like that could work too. So again, there's no one way to do it, but you want to have a plan for what's going to happen when those things come up. Finally, in terms of being intentional, I would encourage you to think about how you can get Godly Play outside of the room. So how can you introduce Godly Play to people who are not working with children or parents of children, and get Godly Play to kind of seep out into the culture of your church? What can you schedule as part of your year to make that happen? So a family Ash Wednesday service where you tell a Godly Play story, or Godly Play Large. Lots of people are doing Godly Play Large now. Or a small group study that uses some Godly Play. What can you do to help the adults in your community better nurture and support the work that you're doing with children? How is that part of your schedule? Getting ready is so important in Godly Play, right? And it's hard to find time to get ready sometimes. And so what's the plan for getting everybody ready? Now, I want to stop and say, good enough is good enough. And you're not going to be able to think through every single one of these things tomorrow for the rest of this Godly Play year. But it is helpful, I think, to be thinking about the questions that you should ask and where you could make some changes, or what you're already doing that's really great. I mean, lots of people are doing all this stuff, and it's great. But I don't want it to seem overwhelming. I just want it to seem helpful. So the first thing about getting ready and getting ready on the calendar is what's happening with your 2 and 3-year-olds? Are they getting ready to join your Godly Play class? Do you have some Montessori materials to help them develop concentration and focus? Do you have a couple stories that you share over and over again? What are you doing? Like, what do they know about Godly Play? What gets them ready to participate in the circle? Do you have a plan to do an orientation session? It's in the book, but sometimes when you've been doing Godly Play for a while, it feels like everybody knows what's happening, and so you think, we only have so many Sundays in the year, and already St. Francis Day we're not having Sunday school, and already we're not going to have Sunday school the next week either. This is an actual conversation I've had with myself. So, I don't want to do that. Like, it's too much. They know what to do. They'll figure it out. That really does not set the tone for the best year possible. So figuring out a way to really spend some time doing that orientation with the children, which also means you have to do that work with the adults, so that then they're really ready to help the children get ready. I love a 10 best ways for parents, so that parents know what to do, or families, grandparents. We have a lot of grandparents. People need clear expectations. That's helpful. So let them know what you need. They need to go to the bathroom before they come in, even if you have a bathroom in the classroom. It's more helpful if they could just go on the way in, right? So just tell them that. And some will and some won't, but communicate those expectations and hopes so that you can have a better experience week after week of the children truly being as ready as they can be to enter the classroom. What are your scheduled opportunities for your adults to reflect collectively on their practice? If you do nothing else, if you go home and tell the parable of the Good Shepherd every Sunday for the entire year of 2020, if you can put on your calendar scheduled opportunities for guides to collectively reflect on their practice, to pray and feast and play, you will have done the most important thing. We have to find a way for the adults who do this work with children to be fed and to grow. And I believe that this is the most important part of that. So there are lots of ways to do it. It doesn't have to be complicated. A super easy thing that's a good start is if you have a teaching team that's not, even if you just have a teaching team of 2 people, but if you have a teaching team that has 3 people or 4 people, so everybody's not there every week, the doorkeeper every week sends a summary email of the conversation. You remember that at the end, the storyteller and the doorkeeper are supposed to debrief? So, that's already written down. Often doesn't happen. But try to encourage that, and then get the doorkeeper to send an email that says, this is what happened today, this is what we noticed, this is what we thought was important. Not an essay, just a paragraph. So that everybody on that teaching team, whether they're there or not, is connected to the children, to the other adults, to the practice, and they're constantly engaging with that spiritual nurture of the children, but also that community of adults that is really necessary.
It's also helpful if you've had someone that has had someone die or a pet die.
Yes.
You can share that so that people aren't,
surprised.
Surprised when you walk in on
Yes.
Sunday and they're not there.
That's exactly right. So people knowing what's going on with the children from week to week. A pet dies, a grandparent dies. Yeah, that's exactly.
Or you notice the kid is just not there that day and you're concerned and you need to find more information. I mean, sometimes you know and sometimes you don't know
Right.
what's wrong, but you may know something's wrong.
Yes, exactly. So following up with families kind of as a team, taking that pastoral responsibility on, which is an important part of being a guide in the classroom. Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. The last thing is something that is really coming out of my preschool experience, but I want to hold it up and suggest it. I think it's really important for Godly Play guides to get together and have an adult circle. So that's another way for these people to come together and reflect and pray and feast and play. Even when that's not possible, there is something very, very helpful and important about having the adults spend time with the response materials. So what materials are on your shelf? Why are they there? What have you found to be provocative about them and engaging? And as you're getting more deeply into the year with the children, what can you think of from this experience that you've had that would be helpful to add or move or whatever? So this is like not something that is a big thing that we talk about in Godly Play a lot, but it is a huge thing in preschool world, and it's been really helpful to me. So if you can schedule that time as well, I know I'm like, so much time, but again, it doesn't have to be, you could even just send a block of clay home and say, see how this feels in your hand all week. I mean, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I think it can be an invitation to go deeper. That's the thing, really, with volunteers, is if you're inviting them to do something that is going to deepen their practice and deepen their relationships, then often they want to do it. If you're asking them to do something that's a pain, then they don't. Neither do I. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of materials, response materials, as you're thinking about scheduling, think about how you want to have work days set up. So do you want to have work days on your calendar? I think if you have a program that is a 45-minute hour, you need work days. You have to have them. The children will not be able to deeply engage their work over and over again without a dedicated Sunday to do some good, solid work. If you are living the dream and have an hour-and-a-half Godly Play session every week, then maybe you as a team sit down and say, when it seems like the children need a work day, we're going to figure out how to do that. But either way, work days need to be part of your thinking, what you're thinking about. And including some really cool stuff is also helpful. So, couple things about work days that you could be thinking about if you know you have one coming up. Is there anything that the children have been particularly interested in that you could help extend by adding something to the shelf? So this here is a couple of children looking at a Bible that has English and Hebrew and Greek, and that had kind of emerged. And so, it's a cool thing to have in your room all the time, but if you have people who are particularly interested, maybe you could borrow it from the priest. They have it. Are there children, and particularly young children, but not exclusively, who need some instruction on how to use good art materials? They, if you have oil pastels, or if you want to include hammer, nails, wood, yeah? If you want to have things like that, they need some instruction around that. They need a lesson. So how do you find the time to give them a lesson on that art material? Well, maybe it's during a workday. And that's another place where the right person, not just any person, but the right person could come into the room and help provide that lesson as well. So I did a workshop last weekend at a church where one of the parents of children in the classroom is a Montessori teacher. And so she doesn't really want to be the Sunday school teacher for her children, but she can come in because she has that expertise and that interest and that disposition towards children and that understanding of what it means to be an adult in the Godly Play classroom. She can come in and teach them how to use all kinds of cool stuff. And so that really expands their ability to more deeply engage the response materials, making work time just a little bit more meaningful, maybe. The final thing, and I actually love to do this as much as possible, but again, this might be like a violation godly play rules. I really enjoy having apples cut in half horizontally, so like, with the apple cutter available for children who cannot choose work. So it's not deep, responsive work. It is, though, productive work that adds to the community when you use those apples for the feast. So it's not a job that you're asking people to do instead of engaging in their work, because the doorkeeper can do it. But if you have a child who just can't get into it, this can be a nice way for them to meaningfully participate. Same with pouring the water. If you need to do that during work time because somebody just cannot, I think that that's helpful. But on a work day, that would be a good time to introduce this. And so, like, 3-year-olds can do this. It's yeah. Spreadsheets. So now we're gonna get into it, for real. Lee and Kristen and I have all put together some 3-year cycles for all the age groups. And they're different, and our churches are different, and our needs are different, and they're not gonna be what you need, but they might give you some ideas. So I'm going to post those, I hope. They were very specific about posting PDF files, which I do. I mean, I can post them as a PDF, but to me, an editable spreadsheet would be much better. So if I can't post it that way, you can email me and I'll send them to you that way. But I think it's gonna work. So you should definitely be using a spreadsheet to make your story cycle. And you could use Google Sheets, you could use Excel. There are all kinds of crazy free online things these days. Do not do it in a Word document. It's just gonna make you mad. And if you don't know how to use Excel, ask somebody, because it's time. Spreadsheets are changing the world. When you do it that way, then you can have, the different tabs for each group, and it'll just keep it more organized for the next person, because if you're planning a 3-year cycle, you might not be the person who needs to think about it the next time the 3-year cycle comes around. And it's helpful to know that when you complete a 3-year cycle, there are 2 years of children who need to go back to the beginning of that cycle. So you want to have all that documented really well, really easily for people to get to and figure out. Other things that might make your life better, Sign Up Genius, I think, is a very helpful way to set up your actual schedule with your volunteers. You can set up the stories if you want to. I think it's helpful, though, to include those people in your process. So I'm talking about all this like you're just going to sit down and make a schedule, but what I really mean is I want you guys to be thinking about all of this and then talking to whoever else is going to be in the classroom, because it is something that everybody needs to kind of think about and be prepared to be flexible with and all that. So Sign Up Genius, so you have the stories, the dates, and then people can sign up. Now, if you want to be a little more controlling about that, because you, like I, think it's more helpful if you have a teaching team of 3 people to have A, B, B, C, C, A, that's fine too. You can input all that into the Sign Up Genius and then make it public so that people can move around if they need to. But what you really want is to have a real-time, I know who's going to be there on Sunday morning, they know what story they're going to tell, and it's all together. Sign Up Genius is not the only way to do that. It's just free, pretty easy. Doodle polls, if you're trying to get your teachers' schedules figured out, that's helpful. I have a doodle appointment calendar now, which is a little bit embarrassing because I feel like it makes me seem a little self-important, but so helpful. So you can set up something to sync with your Google Calendar so that people can basically just make appointments with you, and they'll know if you're available or not. My goal is for everyone to do that, so then it doesn't seem self-important, it just seems efficient. Because even though ministry isn't efficient, like that stuff, that's a waste. All right, so all kinds of things you can do to make scheduling easier, and I hope that you will consider those. Finally, and really most important, is if you're trying to think through your schedule and it's not working out, or you're feeling frustrated about it, or you think, I hear what you're saying, Mary Hunter, but like, really, I just think that there's some things that I want to include, and it doesn't seem like that's what you were talking about. Whatever. There's so many people who want to help you. You know, people who do godly play are deeply devoted to godly play. And so there's a whole group of people called the Godly Play Missioners. I am a missioner, as is Teresa, and Kat Mercer is here as well. Sabrina is here as well as a missioner. Anna Thomas is here. So there are lots of us even here, but generally, we're available to answer your questions. It's pretty much a volunteer thing. We're excited about it. We might not respond within 10 minutes, although if it's an interesting enough question, I will. So we can help. The trainers are an amazing resource. Kristen's a trainer, Emily's a trainer, Lee's a trainer. Wealth of knowledge. If you really want to get it right, those are the people to ask. If you just need like a quick answer, I'm your girl. So all of that information is on the Godly Play website. And then finally, you know, we live in such a connected world. So ask your question on the Godly Play Facebook page. We have an Instagram account now. Could maybe connect with people. There are so many ways to get the help that you need. So please, we love talking about this stuff, right? So, come on. So we're just going to talk more about scheduling, answer your questions, and have a more informal conversation for the rest of the time. I think this is going to work. No. Good question.
Spreadsheets are usually per classroom, then the weeks for the classrooms are the weeks that you're doing Godly Play. And then within that would be the story. Some of them that I've seen and that I use in my class, it has the story and the teacher and the door person listed. So it's not by child, it's by classroom and by week.
Come on up here, Emily. Anybody who has something to say, just come up front.
It's just a real small thing.
But do it on the microphone so that it gets picked up on the live stream.
Gotcha.
And I'm Emily Griffin. I'm a Godly Play trainer and happy to be here. One just really small thing when you're making your spreadsheets and the schedules that you're going to hand out to teachers, another really helpful thing is to have a column for what color you are in the liturgical year.
Yes.
And so just that visual reminder to them that this is the week when you need to change it from white to green or whatever. So.
Yeah. Well, so another thing along those lines that I didn't say, but when you are putting together that spreadsheet, it's helpful not just to have the color, but also to have notes about, you know, this is the first Sunday of Lent, this is the second Sunday of Lent, this is, again, going back to what's happening in the lives of the children, this is the third Sunday of Lent and the first Sunday of spring break for half the kids in my class. I mean, you don't have to have that level of detail, obviously, in the 3-year cycle, but it is good to have those notes so that you kind of have a sense of what's happening.
And that also is helpful for when you have anticipated low attendance weeks. You know, so if it's the start of spring break, you likely are going to have a smaller classroom. That might be an opportunity to do a work day. It might be an opportunity to do a story that the storyteller or the mentor hasn't told before and might be more comfortable telling it in a smaller circle type of thing. That's a little bit of a nuance that's, you know, more in the moment rather than trying to do all 3 years out.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to have a 3-year plan, and then at the beginning of every year, you're going to say, here's the plan, and what part of this plan is going to work, and what isn't. And keep notes about that. So then the next year, you're also continuing to try to have that continuity.
I just want to go back to the part in Mary Hunter's presentation when she talked about the spiral curriculum and how important that is and how overwhelming it can be to new people with especially new programs. We are in our second year of a new program at the church where my husband is the associate rector, and I am not the director in charge of that program, so I kind of have been working as a consultant with them. And the director had been trained, but there's so much that happens in training, and there's so much to think about when you're starting a new program. So I was in this kind of interesting relationship of like letting him figure some things out and just do it. That's a godly play way of doing things, but also consulting with him and pointing out like these are some stories that should not be on the schedule. We were fortunate that we were gifted with almost a full classroom, and we're able to have enough sponsors in the congregation to buy us another full classroom. So we have a lot of stories that we will not be able to tell. So for someone who's new to the program, like starting a new program, there's so much excitement and, look at all these stories, and I want to tell all of these stories. And, when he made the schedule, it really was a learning process for him and I to sit down together and for me to point out, again, that this is not how the spiral curriculum works. And then the second year, again, it was like, I want to tell all these other stories. No, we have to tell these stories again, So just to say that it can be overwhelming, and we don't want to stifle your excitement, but we want to make sure that it's done right. Like Mary Hunter talked about, the intention behind why we do it that way.
Yeah.
And I find that happens often. It's the adults who are like, I'm ready to move on. Like, this is awesome. I need more.
Yeah.
And so use that. I'm Kristen Erskine, by the way. I'm a Godly Play Foundation trainer. Teresa Ferris, our Director of Training Operations, missioner. And but it's really helpful to get your adults together and say, we have a new story. Let's play with it together. Who wants to tell it? Let's wonder. What materials do we want to have for the response time? And let's spend 2 hours just playing with this story. It feeds your adults and has you ready to feed your children, even if that's not happening. And so one of the things that I've done with my classroom levels is I list all of the stories that could possibly happen within that 3-year cycle. So the only stories that are going to be on that 3, 4, and 5-year-old schedule are going to be on that page. And I like colors too. And so I color coded them. So if it's green, everybody can hear it. And then if it's yellow, then it's going to be for your 6 to 9-year-olds. And then there are going to be some things that don't happen until you're a big kid, until you're ready to synthesize things. And so what are those going to be, so that they're things that everyone's always looking forward to, because we like milestones. We can't wait to be 13 in the Episcopal Church so that we can do Rite 13. So what happens when you're going to move into the elementary godly playroom? Well, there are going to be more stories. And then what's going to happen when you move into 4th grade? You're going to have real projects that you get to tell to the whole class. And so that there are things the kids are always looking forward to, but your teachers are continually developing as well.
So, and on the flip side, if you're a congregation that doesn't have 2 full classrooms, what's nice about doing a 3-year plan is as you move up with your older children, you don't need every single extension story. You might need, a fourth of those stories. And you can make a plan. So in 3 years, I'm going to need to buy these 4 stories. And then the next year, I really want to be able to get these 4 stories. So that it also can help, I think, not feel the burden of the expense. You don't have to have every story right away. It's freeing, hopefully.
Right. In the parish that I was in, we eventually had 3 classrooms, and it took us 9 years to outfit the classrooms. So we had 1 classroom that had just core stories, and then we slowly added to each of the classrooms. With the schedule, we shared stories until we got to the place that each room had its own stories. But we still share sometimes.
So before we just keep talking, because we I mean, we could talk about godly play forever. Are there questions specifically that you would actually like to have? Yeah, answer. Yeah, let's pass the microphone around maybe.
I'm actually not doing teaching right now. I'm just doing this because I'm here.
Yeah.
But I loved it when I did it. But one of the problems that we had is we really don't have that many kids. And so we don't have them broken up by ages.
I was hoping somebody
Everybody's
would ask that.
together.
Yes.
And I mean, when I was teaching, I didn't think that was a problem. But because it was just, you know, I've done some teaching, so, and preschool teaching, so in particular, so I kind of knew what to do. But if you've got a kid that, I mean, we always had some kids that were like really getting into the response, and other kids that were just kind of looking at me like, I want to see the horse again, or what? Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, I thought that was kind of a challenge.
Yes. So how do you schedule?
Yes.
And use your schedule to support a community of children that ranges beyond the 3 years? Yes, that's an excellent question. I have some thoughts on that, but I want to hear what other people have to say first. No? Okay. Yeah, Kristen. Yeah.
You first.
Oh, fine. So I have not spent a ton of time in a classroom with a huge age range. However, my mom is a godly play teacher, and in her church, it is 3, 4. As kind of a shout out to her. She doesn't really let the 3-year-olds come. So 4-year-olds really through 5th or 6th grade. So it's a big age range. And so one of the things that they've done is the church is called All Saints. And so the saints are an important part of their classroom, which, you know, might not always be the case if you just had younger children. But they have really gotten deeply into the stories of the saints. They tell a saint story once a month. I mean, they are doing every single one. They make a big deal about who your saint is. They get so that, you know, the 3-year-old and the 10-year-old who are both born in December are like, we have the same saint. So that's not an answer to your question exactly, but it is to say that just because there are 3-year-olds in your classroom doesn't mean you can't have the materials in your classroom. It just means that if you only have 3 to 6-year-olds, you don't need to go beyond. So in terms of then scheduling to support that, so they're doing the Saints thing once a month. But also, everybody is hearing a core story every Sunday, pretty much. And then there's the opportunity during the response time for the older children to kind of get pulled aside to tell a different story. It's not probably the most ideal way to do it, but it does seem to work. And because it's a small group, it works itself out. Yeah.
Right, and I think when you have those large age ranges, it's about the flexibility of who's facilitating, because it's going to depend on who shows up that day. And so if you end up with a group of older children, then you can touch the core story and spend time telling the extension story to the whole room. How you set up your space with an all-ages classroom can make a big difference too. There might be response materials that are available for your younger children, and then on higher shelves, you would have materials that are for your older children for the response time. The other thing I have seen happen in this, during our vacation Bible school in the summer, we do a 2-hour work session or a story godly play session, and so we had time where the youngest kids and everybody came in for the story, released the younger kids for their work, and then pulled the circle closer to do those next level stories. So we did parables along with saints. And so we would do the parables, and then the bigger kids would come in, and we would do the saints side by side with them. If you're in a regular classroom, you could have your youngest kids come in, and their day might be a quiet work day. They're dismissed, and the story that you're telling is just for your older children. So there are a variety of ways that you can schedule it, but because you don't know who's going to show up, it would be really nice if people made RSVPs for Sunday school so we would know. I keep trying to encourage that, but it hasn't happened yet. So that way you have that ability to know what the best thing to do is and what stories you want to have in your back pocket so that you're ready to go for that Sunday. Other questions?
I think, yes.
Not used to microphones. I have it kind of feeds off of this question. I have a classroom where we have seen tremendous growth in our Godly Play classroom in the last year. We've gone from 6-ish kids, 2 of them are mine when I came to the church, so it was like 4 before, and then I doubled almost the classroom with my 2. And so we allow 3-year-olds, we let them choose if they're ready to come in. Sometimes they get halfway through the room or class and decide, I'll just go back to the nursery.
Right.
But we give them the choice of, are you ready to join us this morning? So we have that. But then we have this older group of children who've grown quite a bit this year. So now a majority of our class is these older children who haven't really heard these stories, these core stories enough. So how do you schedule for the children who join in the middle or aren't consistently coming? We're lucky that, oddly enough, all of our new families do regularly come. They rarely miss, which is, I know, right? Yeah, shocking. So that's what I'm wondering about. How do we schedule for the kids who are intellectually ready to move on but haven't heard the stories yet, and the kids who aren't consistently coming?
Well, first I would say that's why the spiral curriculum is so important, and that's why you have to include those core stories. And like I said, our program is still new, and we started with all of the kids. We didn't start with the youngest and then work up. So we are not really introducing a lot of the extension and enrichment even yet with our older kids, because I still feel like even though they're older, they still need to hear those core stories several times before we can build on those. So those are my first thoughts. Anyone want to add on that?
Sure. When we started our Godly Play program, our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds were doing Godly Play. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade was doing something else, and it was also meditative and quiet. But our oldest kids were, I don't know what they were doing, but it was really loud and crazy. And so it was time for them to get Godly Play, but they hadn't done it since they were young. And so we started with the core stories, and they were really excited, and the depth of their wondering was the place that you were really able to meet them where they were, and to take those things that are really funny, because that's what they're trying to be. When you say, I wonder what we could leave out and still have everything we need when we tell the story of the ark and the great flood, and they go, the water. And you say, oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so tell me how this story goes. And the level of playfulness and seriousness of what was God really doing and how did it happen with a story that's really basic, that we think of as a core, that we spend a lot of time with our younger children. The older children just took it apart and put it back together in a very different way. What we're doing is never going to harm our children. So if they're coming in and getting core stories, and we love them, and we love the stories, and we wonder with them and encourage them to wonder deeply, they're going to be able to make meaning in their lives and to use this language of our faith. And the most important thing is that they have that core language so that it can grow and extend into bigger things. So that maybe, just maybe, when they come up against those real trials in their life, they know where to find hope. And they know that they are not going to walk in dangerous places and be alone. Or if they felt like they were alone, when they look back at it, they can say, you know, I really wasn't alone. And someone came to me just when I needed them. And I really know that that's because God does not have us grow up alone, but keeps us in a community.
I would say that occasionally you'll get some of these new kids who are older, and then alongside them you'll have older kids who really have been through it for a while, and you
Yeah.
do have the ones who feel like they know everything already, and you'll have them in the same room. And so one strategy you could use with the kids who think they know everything already is like when you're listening to this story, think about, try to hear something you haven't heard before, or pay such close attention that during the response time you can tell the story back to me. Give them a challenge. That way that gives them an opportunity to demonstrate what they know. That can be a way to kind of engage the kid who feels like I've been at this forever and I know all this already. Or, maybe during the, just say, I know you've heard this one a lot, and there's actually another story that's kind of connected to this. And so after the whole group hears this story, maybe during response time, I can show you this other story that's got a little bit more information, and we can work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a 7-year-old who is that kid who's like, I've been doing this forever, because he's been doing it since he was 3, and every place that we've lived, I've made sure that he's had godly play. So right now he is still in the way we have the rooms divided in our church. He's in the youngest class, and he will often say to me, Mom, I've heard these stories so many times. I think I should be with the big kids because I'm the expert at godly play here at our church. Because he's been doing it longer than the other children. So I do often say to him when we're hearing a story that I know he's heard lots of times, I'll remind him that just like our family stories, if they know that we find joy in that story, they're going to enjoy hearing us tell it again. They're stories that we tell year after year after year that are family stories. They're stories that we hear in church year after year after year that are so important to our faith that we just have to keep hearing those. But just kind of as a personal testimony to my son and what he's kind of been able to do with this language, this Advent, we're lighting the candles on the wreath, and he knows that the center candle is the Christ candle, because that's the Christ. It's like the Christ candle that we have in godly play. And the first Sunday of Advent, when we were lighting the first candle, he was kind of wondering about the candles and the wreath, and he said, well, this candle is the Christ candle. Whose candles are these other candles? And I said, oh, I wonder. And he said, I think this candle should be Pop's candle. And it's his grandfather, who actually died before he was born, but he knows him because we tell stories about him a lot. So he said, I think this candle should be Pop's candle. We're going to, when we light this candle, we'll think of Pop. So, we did the normal Advent prayers and all of that. And then when it was time to put the candle out, he said, I want to change the candle. I want the light to change, and I want to see it. And so he put the candle out, and he changed the light, and he watched it spread around the room. And he said, now Pop is everywhere in the room with us, and he's here with us, and we're remembering him, and he can be there whenever we need him. And so that's just a testament to, he's heard the Advent story, he's heard the Holy Family story, like he's heard those so many times. And he was in a point in his life where he was wondering about and thinking about that his Pop wasn't here with us. And he was using that language to make sense of that situation and to connect it with the stories of his faith in a really meaningful way that he's only able to do that because he's heard those stories so many times.
That leads me to a thought. Thank you, Teresa. One of the things that you want to consider when you're scheduling, if you do have multiple classrooms, is the weeks in which you will all tell the same story. So in the older classrooms, you might have that opportunity to do extension and enrichment stories, but there might be weeks in your church year, whether it happened to be All Saints Sunday or there is the baptism of our Lord, where you would all tell the baptism story in all 3 classrooms, because what that helps with is connecting that to siblings, and siblings taking those stories home and engaging with their parents. And that's might be also where you want to be intentional about handing out parent pages or things of that nature to kind of encourage those conversations at home. Because we have them for 45 minutes, or on occasion, my church is fabulous in that we do have an hour and a half several times a month, so I'm one of those blessed people. But it helps to encourage those stories at home.
Yeah, so huge shout out to the parent pages. I really recommend actually ordering the digital parent pages if you can, and you get a license so that you can send them out to the people in your church. And I like to send them out ahead of time, just as a kind of reminder, like, we're here, we're going to tell this story on Sunday. I so hope you're going to be with us. And if you are, you can talk to your child about it. And if you're not, if your child's been doing Godly Play for a while, you could talk to them about, oh, well, we didn't go to church this week, but it was the baptism story. What do you know about that? So really helping, it's an easy email to kind of bring people back into the practice and what you're trying to do. The other thing I wanted to say quickly about being intellectually ready for different stories is that, for me at least, and I bet that this is true for many people, those core stories are really the place where it is the easiest to completely enter into the story and come close to the mystery of God. That's why they're the core stories. They're really, really essential. And if you're thinking about Godly Play as a spiritual practice, then having that contemplative time and those moments with those essential stories is much more important. And not that you don't enter in contemplatively with the extension stories, but it's not quite as easy. And they do lend themselves to more analysis and more thinking about how things fit together. And all of that is great, and you want to do that. But to me, that part is not the most important. So if you have a class of 6 to 9-year-olds or a wide age range and you're just starting Godly Play, I wouldn't worry about anything other than the core stories. And if they leave and go to 7th grade and they've heard the core stories 3 times and that's all they did, that would be great.
I just realized one quick thing, but now I'll pass the mic on. One of the things, we use this term core story, extension, and enrichment. And for those who might be new to Godly Play or kind of trying to figure out what's a core versus an extension, at the back of all of our complete guides of Godly Play is this wonderful chart that helps you understand what's a core story in the sacred, liturgical, parable section, what's an extension, what's an enrichment. So for the purposes of scheduling, as Mary Hunter says, you sit down and you deliberately do a 3-year. I always have that out in front of me to help with that kind of, I don't have them memorized.
And that is also available as a digital download, Appendix A and B by themselves from Church Publishing. So if you, like me, need things electronically and you like to get them piecemeal, there's a lot available through Church Publishing. Yeah.
So a couple of other things, just things to keep in mind as you're scheduling. One thing I have found is that sometimes it does, as wonderful as it is to plan ahead, sometimes it really is helpful to pay attention to what's happening in the class and the questions that are coming up, and that sometimes you need to take a break from whatever it is that you scheduled to address the wondering that's happening in the room. A couple of years ago, I had it's a 4th and 5th grade class, and they, several of them were acolytes, and I live in Washington, D.C., so the context might help. During response time, they decided to make protest signs. and they said, what is the Bible really saying? What are we doing in church? These words don't make any sense. And they made little placards, and they used the popsicle sticks so that they could process around. And they wanted to walk around church with their protest signs. And so, which
It's awesome.
yes, yeah. So I threw out the next week I just said, okay, for the next 3 weeks, we're not going to do what was normally on the schedule. We're going to go and we're going to work specifically on what's happening in the worship service, do the circle of the Holy Eucharist, take them into church, have them work with the altar guild. We went through the bulletin. I said, circle anything you don't understand. And then we used that as a way of thinking about, well, how are we going to help make this clearer? And so have your plan, but if they're making protest signs and feel like they're not going to be heard, then they're not going to come back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, being very intentional about why I'm making the schedule then actually allows more flexibility. So, and communicating that to the other people who are having to implement the schedule. So if we all know the reason the schedule was put together this way was because this is what we're trying to accomplish, and there's a higher goal or a higher purpose, then absolutely you want to move from that. Or if there's a different way to accomplish that same goal, absolutely you want to do that. But having the structure in place, I think for people who maybe aren't as able to adapt as Emily, who's a priest and deeply committed to godly play and a trainer for many years, having those conversations really helps grow their understanding and their ability to be flexible.
And I think with the older kids and with all of our children, we want to meet them where they are. And so my team of teachers working with our older children, we started the year during the orientation, and we would talk about, what are your favorite stories? What stories do we need to hear this year because you love them so much? What are the stories that you haven't heard that you want to spend more time with? What are some things that are happening in your life that you want to explore and know more about? And then having the teachers come back, and when we would sit down and say, okay, so we have a draft of what we thought we were going to do. Based on what you've heard, what do we need to change, and how can we adapt, and where do we think those places are that, we might run up against something where we have to take a left turn? Because I think that flexibility really is most important. That it would be great for the kids to get every single godly play story, but that might not be exactly what they need. And so really listening and hearing what they're asking for is very important.
Other questions? I had one more clarifying thought, because I think when we were talking about keeping the younger age group to the core stories, that is really to preserve their ability to hear the core stories over and over again. So I think Kristen said this, but I want to say it again. It's not going to hurt them to hear a different story. And if you think about a Montessori classroom, when you do have a mixed age group, my child, when he was in first grade, spent a lot of time watching the third graders get lessons on things that he was not ready for. But it was good for him to see that and to be interested in it, and to have the teacher come back and say, this is the lesson you need today so that you can have this other lesson later. So if you do have that large age range, I love the idea of a quiet work day where there's a smaller circle or something like that. Yeah. We have 10 more minutes.
Oh, great. So again, I just attended Godly Play training with Emily. It's the second time I've attended the training, but at my previous parish, it was not going to work. I had a volunteer tell me, you only have an hour with them all week, and I don't want you to wonder with them. I want you to tell them what they need. Yeah.
I mean, for some people, that is really
totally
their
understand. And she's
path.
a traditionally trained educator. So, and she was my head volunteer. So I went with the volunteer.
Yeah.
But luckily, I'm in a new parish where Godly Play really is been very I think it's been essential to me as the guide, but also to my children. It's literally what has dragged the parents to our church because the kids are doing it. So now we have this room where it's getting cozy, and we need to we've discussed with church leadership about adding a second room. It's in the next year, which overwhelms me because I'm still relatively new. So when you do that, do you divide by, I've heard some divide by ages, but could we divide by, because now we have she's going to third grade, but she's heard all the stories since she was 4. So age separating wouldn't really work with our group. So how would we start to separate to another room to meet the needs of the children who've heard the stories that are in the age of 6 to 9, but then the children who haven't heard the stories who are in the age of 6 to 9? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Because age wouldn't, I can't be like, oh, all the 4th graders now.
Right. Yeah. Kristen, I feel like you look like you have something to say.
Well, I can always.
I don't think we all have to always agree on everything, but I
Yeah.
would still divide by age, personally, is how I would do it. And like I said, like my son, he's in the youngest group that is the newest group, but he's the most experienced godly player there. And as much as he thinks he should be with the older kids, I don't let him. And so in some ways, his presence there is really helpful because he knows how to be in the circle and he knows how to wonder. And for him to be in that circle with the kids who are newer and to kind of model that wondering and to see how he is not afraid to go deeper and to be in that space, I think really helps the rest of the circle.
I think what are the natural communities within your parish? When do certain things start and happen are some other questions that can be helpful. What age do the children start singing in the choir? What age do the children start being trained to be acolytes? So, what are some of the natural cohorts for when they get into the youth program? Which age group of kids are going to be together? I think some of those kinds of things can help you make those decisions. And again, even if you have children that are going to be 4th or 5th graders, they're going to be nonplussed to come to Sunday school with a group that's mainly 3 and 4-year-olds. If you're going by experience within godly play. So I would think about the peer group because it's about the relationships as much as it is about the stories. So I would consider that. It might be that you do something that's through kindergarten and then elementary as being a natural breaking point so that you are in a place where you have your core stories and you're extending as you get that second classroom. But really think about your peer groups within the church and what relationships you want to foster so that as your children enter into the youth program, they've had time with that cohort they're going to be spending a lot of time with doing pilgrimages and those kinds of things, because that's really important. Sometimes our youth ministry teams forget that we've spent this time with the children and that they're ready for those big things and that big work. So I would pay attention to that as well.
So I'm not disagreeing with any of that because I don't think this is the question that you were asking explicitly, but there is value in having a mixed age class. So if what you're saying is I have a classroom and it's 4-year-olds to 5th graders, and now I can have a second classroom.
There's not space.
Right. No. Right, no. But if what you were saying is my 6 to 9-year-old class is too big for one classroom, I would, and what we do, is have 2 6 to 9-year-old classrooms so that it remains mixed age, because I think there is huge value in that. That is not to say, to me, that is better than to have a 2nd grade class and a 3rd grade class, in part because, this is not disagreeing with you, as they move into youth group or get older, you want them to have a variety of ages that they already know, and it also, if they're all in school together, it can help, make things a little smoother. If they're not all in school together, it can help. So I would as best you can, preserve a mixed age group, even if you have two of the same mixed age groups.
We said
Yeah?
the same thing.
Yeah, we're agreeing, right? I think. Yeah, all right. Well, thank y'all so much. This was really fun. We love to talk about godly play. And please do, I will try to post the Excel spreadsheets. If you don't see them, you can email me, Mary Hunter at thevickerswifeatl.com, and that's on my handouts too. So, and there are 2 handouts that went along with this. One has a little more information about work days, and one just kind of has this presentation in a different form.
And visit us at our table.
Yes, come to the table, and this afternoon, once I get them, we will have stickers that say, "Godly player, I wonder!" Exclamation point.
Come here, Kristen, tell a story at
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Thursday evening bedtime stories come.
And Teresa's doing a workshop on Thursday too. Yeah, lots of godly playing. So thank y'all.